So today's topic is about air pressure in tires. We're going to spend a fair amount of time talking about all sorts of things on tires, like tire treads and styles and rims and wheels and all that sort of good stuff. But today is one of the basic concepts, and that's tire pressure. So every tire has air inside of it. Tires used to have what's called a tube inside of it, just like a bicycle would. They no longer have that. They're now tubeless, so they just have a really good seal onto the rim. Keep in mind that the metal part of the wheel is the rim, or that's the wheel, and then the rubber part is the tire. I'm sorry, metal part's the rim, rubber part's the tire. And inside of this has air. Air pressure in a tire is actually the first part of suspension of a car. If a car tire was solid, which would be nice because you wouldn't get flat tires, you would have a very, very rough ride. So it would be difficult to drive. It would be it wouldn't be very comfortable. It would be very, very rough. So instead they have air. When you do have air pressure in a tire, you have to monitor that pressure to make sure that you have the correct amount of pressure, because the correct amount of pressure in a tire will make sure that you are getting good gas mileage, that your car is driving safely, that the tires are doing the job that they're supposed to do. Because if you have too much air or not enough air in them, you're not going to be riding on the right side or right part of the tread of the tire. So things will get a little bit wear differently, and you won't get the kind of traction that you're really looking for. So air pressure is really important. Air on the tire goes in and out through what's called a valve. Now the valve is often covered by a little valve cap. The cap does nothing more than to keep dirt out and ice and salt, but more specifically, the valve itself is right here, and this is what's called a Schrader valve. It's a standard type of valve that you often find on the same type of thing as just about any bicycle or anything, mostly in the United States. There are some other types of valves out there, such as Presta, but this is the most common. In the center of the valve is this little button, and that's when you press that button, you're releasing air from the tire. If you go to fill air into the tire, the filler actually has a little thing that pushes that button in order to overcome the pressure of the tire. It's a nice idea to have caps on the tire valve, just because, again, it keeps debris and dirt out of there. Now the question is, how much air pressure do we put into a tire? And that's really what we're going to talk about today. So first of all, when you put air and pressure in a tire, you would think that it would just stay there. Generally on a new tire and a really good quality rim, it does, but oftentimes there are some issues and you will lose air pressure in the tire. That can happen for a number of reasons. Number one, you could have a hole in the tire, a puncture, like a nail that went in and out of the tire, or a small screw. The tire could be so worn out that there's not much lining left on the inside of the tire to hold the air on the inside. And other reasons, especially on some older cars, if it has what's called a steel rim, you can get rust along the inside of the rim, and that sort of lets the air slowly creep out. When you try to have air pressure hold inside of a tire, it wants to find its way out. You want to keep it in there, and like I said, you want to really keep it up to the right pressure. Now, pressure in a tire is measured in what's called pounds per square inch. We abbreviate that with PSI. So you'll hear the term PSI quite often. That's pounds per square inch. Some other methods are in bar or in kilopascals, but mostly here in America we generally use pounds per square inch. One mistake that's really, really important that you want to make sure that you avoid is a lot of people, like a bicycle, will look on the side of the tire to see how much pressure that it takes. That is not the case at all. That is the maximum amount of pressure that can go into a tire before it explodes, and we don't want that. So I'm not sure if you can see this, but really quickly here it says, or closely, it says max pressure 51 PSI. That is the pressure that the tire would literally explode off the rim with, so we don't want to go anywhere near that. The amount of tire pressure that's into a tire is designed and specified by the engineers who made the car in the first place, and that is part of the ideal ride style of the tire. Even if you change to a different brand tire, you're still maintaining the same air pressure. How do we know how much air pressure that we need to put in the car? Well, there's a really easy way to find out, and it is on every car, and that is a very important sticker, which is right here, and it's generally on the inside of the door. In this case, sometimes you'll find it on the end of the door jamb, but in this case, it's here. Now, on modern cars, they're usually nice and bright and have some yellow stuff, and we can look on here and see it says front and rear, and that is the actual tire size. We'll talk about tire sizes later, P235, 60R18. Don't worry about that. What I'm concerned about is cold tire pressure. And in this case, it says 35 PSI. Now, it is the same. It's also 35 PSI for the rear, but there are some cars on occasion that will have a separate tire pressure in the front and the rear. And finally, if your car has a spare tire, it will also say 60 pounds per square inch, which is really common for those small emergency style tires, takes about 50 or 60 PSI. So this sticker is going to be really important, and actually you're going to have an assignment where I would like you to go out and take a picture of this sticker so that you know what it is, and we'll be reading some information off of it. You can see that even an older truck will have this sticker. So in this case, it's not as colorful, but it still does say the same thing. In this case, 35 PSI, and that is for both the front and the back. On this camper trailer, you're going to notice that it's a little bit different. These are more load-bearing tires. They take a lot more weight, so this is even on a trailer. And you can see in this case, it says front 50 PSI, rear 50 PSI, and the spare tire is also 50 PSI. Now you'll notice that the sticker says cold PSI. That doesn't mean it needs to be wintertime in order to check your tire pressure. Basically what it means is the tires should not be heated up, and that only happens when you drive an extensive amount of time. If you just got off the highway and you've been driving for an hour, 2 hours or whatnot, that's not going to give you a whole accurate tire pressure, because the tire pressure does change as the tire and the air temperature gets hotter and colder. You will actually notice that when it is cold out in the morning, especially this time of year in the fall, when the first couple times you go out in the morning and the air is cold, you might have the tire pressure light that comes on, and that's because you were probably just around the verge of where it needs to come on. That cold air made it a little bit thinner, and the tire seemed to have lost some pressure. So after some driving, it might kind of pop up, but it also probably means you're on the verge of having to check it. So how do you check how much pressure is in a tire? I'll show you. So first of all cars manufactured 2009 and after have what's called a TPMS system, tire pressure monitoring system. That is required by law, and that is because it is so important to make sure that you have the right tire pressure in there, that they want to make sure that your car will actually tell you when there's not enough tire pressure in there. And the reason is if you don't have enough tire pressure, you can get a blowout, and the tire can kind of come off the rim, and it can cause an accident and cause harm to you or somebody else. So all systems will have that. So many cars will actually, some of the newest cars will have a little display on the dashboard which will tell you how much pressure is in each car or is in each tire, which is really convenient. But most cars just have a TPMS light. It's a little tire kind of with some little zigzags underneath it. And if that's on, it means that one of your pressures is below its recommended amount. So we took a look at the sticker and we saw that, let's say this car takes 35 PSI. In those TPMS systems, there's about a 2 pound of pressure differential. If it drops 2 pounds or below, the light will come on to alert you that you need to adjust your tire pressure. So if you do have that and it tells you that one of the tires is low and it doesn't tell you how much is in there, the next best step is to go to one of the many gauges that are available. And I recommend that all of you at some point have a tire pressure gauge. This is the most common and most simple style that is out there. They're usually just a few dollars, and basically what happens is you take and you put your thumb on the back and you really push this well into the Schrader valve system, and I'll show you that in a moment, and it will open. It will actually pop open to the amount of tire pressure that you have. So if you can see this, you want to make sure you read the one that says pounds, LBS, and that will tell you how many are in there, not kilopascal, so try not to mix that up, although those numbers are very different than pounds, so it's usually pretty easy to diagnose. Make sure that it's set up for a car. There are a few different styles of these that you see out there. This particular one is for cars, and you can see that the range is somewhere between 5 and 50 PSI. Now, if you had a bike pressure, that bicycle that needed 100 pounds of pressure, this wouldn't work. You'd have to make sure you have one for a bicycle. But since most car tires are usually between about 30 and 35 PSI, this one will work really well for that. I also have one that I use on everything from tractors to quads and dirt bikes, which are actually much more spongy tires for traction, and those are much lower PSI, usually only around 3, 4, maybe 5 PSI, and this gauge will read that. This one only goes up to 20, and it's a lot more precise. So if I want 4 PSI in a tire, I can read 4 PSI, and that will work really well too. The other style that you'll find is a digital gauge. These are definitely my favorite. With a digital gauge, it still has the same style mouth to it that goes onto the valve, and when you push this on, it will actually tell you, and you can even switch between kilopascals, PSI, or bar. And obviously we want PSI. And then another common style you'll see in many shops are this style here, gauge, which this one does actually go up to 100, but it's really accurate, and that works really well. And then, I'm sorry, one last one. When we get to filling the tires in a little bit, this air filling device, which I'll show you in a moment, will actually have a gauge that's on it that will pop open to the amount of tire pressure that's in there. So let's go take a look at how some of these work on the car. One last one for those of you that are into sports. If you want to know how much pressure is in your soccer ball or football, you can have this style. It has a little needle on the end that goes inside the valve of the ball, and this will pop out to, usually this is only up to a few PSI as well, so that will measure that for you. So that's another style, which is pretty neat. Okay, so when you want to measure how much tire pressure that you have to go to each one of your tires. You have to remove the little tire cap, or valve cap. Make sure you put that in a nice safe place. And we'll start off with the most basic of the styles. Okay, so of the different style gauges, my favorite is this type because it's usually the most accurate. It's very simple, and it really does the trick. And you can actually confirm how accurate they are if you do have one of those cars that does tell you how much pressure it's in, because the way that those actually work, there's a sensor inside the car on the opposite side of this valve, and it's a Bluetooth sensor, and it goes and tells the computer in the car how much pressure is in the tire. It's always reading it. It never really needs batteries. They do on occasion go bad, but it's not too often, so it's on the other side of that valve stem there. So in our case though, we're going to use this valve. Now when you push this on, it's really important that you put your thumb on the back of it and that you get a really good tight seal around the valve. All right, so when I go to push this on, okay, you can see that it pushes on. You'll hear a tiny bit of air leak out, and then it stops. As long as it stops, you're getting a good accurate reading. All right, and I can read this and see how much pressure is in there, and I can see I have about 33 pounds of pressure. So if you push this on here and you're just sort of letting the air leak out as it's filling, you are not getting a good accurate reading. You need to make sure that you push good and hard, make sure it seals on there. Also, most of these will keep their pressure once you push it on there once. You usually can remove it and read it. Some of them though, they do, once you take it off there, it will sort of suck itself back in, and that's not as helpful. There are some other styles. I don't always find that these are as accurate, so you have to really find out. I've got some variations between each of these pressures when I read them, so I'm not too happy about that. This one's pretty old, so it might just not be that accurate, but with this style, I can actually kind of push this style on. It gives me a reading, and again, it's a little different than that one. The digital style here, you turn this on. Once again, I don't have as great a luck with these. They work, but sometimes they give me a little bit of a different reading than what it actually is, so I'm not as thrilled about that. And you can see there, so 32, so it's pretty similar. The last style is the type that we will actually use in a little bit to inflate the tire, and that is the style that is most often found at gas stations and service places where you are going to potentially fill up your tire, and that's this type. So even if it's not connected to an air compressor, which I'll show you in a little bit, when I do push this on here, I don't even need to do anything, and it just comes right out. So again, I push it on, and it goes in there. Now, since it's not hooked up to a compressor, if I were to squeeze the little button on it, it would actually leak some air out. But again, these are generally pretty accurate. I'm always pretty happy with this style. So the question is, if you check your air pressure and you see that it's low, Now it's time to add some air into it. So how do you go about doing that? Generally, you need some form of an air compressor in order to fill up a tire. You cannot really do it with a hand pump. There's just too much air in there. It will generally, burn up the pump before you actually get a chance to get the air in there. So there's a few ways to do it. The first one is to go to a gas station or service station where there is what's called free air. All air is free, but compressed air, sometimes they charge you. So oftentimes at some of the local service stations, you'll see a box in one of the parking spots, and you'll put a quarter or 75 cents in there, and it'll give you about 3 minutes of compressed air. At that point, it usually has something like this attached to the end of it, where you can actually bring it to each tire and inflate it and check the pressure that way. Now, please be careful, because they get you with those devices where you pay for them. They give you about 3 minutes to check all your tires. If all your tires are low, it's pretty hard to go around and do it all in 3 minutes unless you prepare for it ahead of time. So what I recommend doing, make sure you park close enough, go around to each one of the valves, take the valve cap off from each one, hold on to them, put them in your pocket or somewhere where they're safe, and make sure that you're all ready to go, that the hose is stretched out, and then you'll be able to get it done in 3 minutes. Otherwise, you'll be paying 75 cents for that last 10 seconds that you need to finish out the job. So with this style, again, let me show you what it looks like when it's hooked up to an air compressor. So compressed air is a great tool to have in the shop, and you'll see it. We use it for all sorts of things, from filling and inflating tires to running certain tools like impact guns in the tire machine and any other pneumatic tool. So it's a really great tool to have in the shop. So you'll see hoses all around the shop with some kind of coupling or fitting that looks like this. It's not water or any chemicals or gas that's going through there. It's simply regular air, pressurized or compressed. So you'll see sometimes we put it on the end of it. We'll put a nozzle on there, and we'll use that for compressed air to remove dust or something like that. In this particular case, we're going to use it to fill tires. So most of the time, this will have this tire inflator on it already when you're at a service station. However, when we do get into the shop, I'll show you how to use it. It's a little bit tricky, but you actually need to kind of hold the hose with a few fingers and take 2 other fingers and be able to push the coupling back in order to put it on there. It doesn't screw on or anything. At that point, I will take this fitting, I'll push it into there, let go, and now it's locked in place and it's locked together. So you have to be careful. Again, I make it look pretty easy. We all struggle with it a little bit once we're first used to it, but at a certain point, you'll get pretty comfortable with it. So at this point, this tool is designed now to add air pressure into the tire. So once again, I can take the cap off. As I mentioned before, when you go to inflate the tire or anytime you go to check pressure, you want to push hard and make sure that you're not leaking air. At this point, I can read on this that this is sticking out to about 32 PSI. I want to add a little bit, so I will push the button. And once I push it, I can kind of push it, and when it only reads when I let go. And when I let go, it's telling me it's still about 32, so I've still got to keep adding air pressure into there. I can actually hear it coming out and being added into the tire. And as I read this, I'm just getting right to about 35 now, so I'm pretty happy with it. At that point, I can take this off and I'm good to go. If I want to double check it with a standard one, I can do that also. So once again, as a review, I take the tip of it and I push it onto the valve and hold it there so no air is leaking out. I read what it tells me on the gauge, and if I need to add a little bit of air, I push the button and then check it again. Remember, it's only going to read when I'm actually letting go of the button. So again, once I get to the correct pressure, I let go. It looks like I leaned a little more, and I'm happy right there. Now I can take and remove this. All right, if I need to remove some air, let's say I went way overboard and I put way too much air in there, and then I read it and it says, oh no, I'm at 40 PSI. Well, with that, what I can do is I can actually disconnect this from the coupling. All right, and now with there nothing attached, it will still give me a good reading. And if I push the button, I'm actually letting a little bit of air out. The other way to go about doing that is with the back side of one of these inflators. You'll notice there's this little button on there, and if I take that, I can use that to push and release some of this air out into nowhere. So again, I put way too much in here at this point, so I want to go back and double check it. And once I know that I'm happy, I'm good to go. The other style valve that you'll see, or inflator, is this guy right here. And this is a simple inflator. It actually works for this way, and if some tires, if you need to come in from the other way, you can also do that as well. And with that, what you want to do here is, once again, with this on here, there is no gauge attached. So you really, with this one, you really need to check the tire pressure. And then if you notice that it's a little bit low, then you can add a little bit of air. Again, the same way that you would with the other one. And then you check it. And once you know you're happy with it, then you can stop. So again, that's another style you might see. In that case, you definitely need your own inflation gauge. So that's pretty much how to check air pressure and release it if you need to as well. So here I'm showing you an example in a car where the vehicle has its own pressure monitoring system. Now, I know from the sticker of this car that there is supposed to be 35 PSI in each tire, but you'll notice that some of them are a little bit over. 36, 1 pound above or below is not so bad, but 38 is too much, which means that at some point somebody put too much air in that tire. Now in this case it's really nice because I can see that it's the rear driver's side tire, so I'm going to go out there, get my gauge, release a little bit of air from it. Now this is pretty neat. It's not on every car. Some tires will, again, some systems will just shine a little light on it, but if you do have this system, that's really pretty convenient. Now on occasion you'll run into a valve cap that is green, and typically what this means is the tire is filled with compressed nitrogen air. So as opposed to straight or standard air, it is just nitrogen, which tends to be a lot more stable, and it doesn't fluctuate with temperature as much. It doesn't leak out as much. That's a little bit better. Most of the time you'll only find this with brand new cars that came from a dealership, or if it came from Costco or some other kind of larger tire places that have compressed nitrogen to be able to fill up your tires with. So it's kind of a neat concept. It doesn't change anything. You can still add air the same way. You can remove air if you need to, but that's another way to go about it. So to finish up, air pressure is extremely important. It's an important safety concept so that the tire stays strong and stable enough and safe. It helps the tires to last a long time. It gives you a better ride when it's the right pressure, and you know, again, increases the overall longevity of everything, including gas mileage. So I hope you found this helpful. We'll do a little activity on this coming up pretty soon, and when we are in the shop, it's a nice courtesy. Any car that comes in or out of the shop, it's always a good idea to check some air pressure on it and just make sure that it's up to date. In terms of your car, if it's a newer car and it has a TPMS system, you really shouldn't have to worry about the air pressure too much unless it actually comes on. Other than that, it's not such a bad idea to check the tire pressure every few weeks or months, or you know, especially as the seasons change. Thanks for watching.